Well, welcome to our session on industry trends called the Regulation of CBD and Hemp. I'm Ivan Barrios, President and CEO of the World Trade Center Miami. The World Trade Center Miami is the organizer of the America's Food and Beverage Show. For those attending the session, please type your questions in the chat area and we will address them at the end of the presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Justin Prochnow and Timothy Stanfield from the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. So guys, the show's yours. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here talking with everyone today. Wish we could see you all in person, but we're going to try and give you a little bit of an overview on the regulation of CBD and hemp in food and beverage products in the US. And I'm going to start off with some overall discussion, and then Tim's going to follow with a little bit of the more the local flavor in Florida and some of the issues that companies have been looking there. We have a slideshow here. I'm not going to get to all of the slides. Sometimes I do 3 hours on these. Luckily for you guys, I only have about 20 minutes, so you only have to hear that much. But we'll try and get through as much as we can, and then certainly we'll have our contact info here, and if you have questions afterwards, we're happy to follow up with them. But I'm going to touch briefly on the differences between marijuana and hemp, some of the federal regulation, how it's regulated in different types of products, and then some of the state-specific requirements. So we're here talking about cannabis sativa. For those of you who don't know, hemp and marijuana, which you most often hear about when you're talking about cannabis, come from the same plant. It's the cannabis sativa plant. And up until 2 years ago, the main difference really was a distinction of the parts of the plant, because the definition of marijuana was any parts of the cannabis sativa plant that don't come from the mature stalks or the ungerminated seeds. And we're going to talk about it in a second. With the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, it's a little bit different distinction. Now the main distinction is the level of THC, which you often hear about, tetrahydrocannabinol. That is the active component in the product. It's usually the psychoactive part of it. So typically when you're talking about hemp, which is the the non-marijuana part of the cannabis sativa plant, you're talking about parts of the plant that have less than 0.3% THC. That's the level that was established in the 2018 Farm Bill. When you're talking about marijuana, you're talking about anything truthfully more than 0.3% THC is technically marijuana, although typically you're talking about, anything that's really effective as being 20% or more of THC. The different components of the cannabis sativa plant, we have terpenes, we have cannabinoids. The one that you hear about most often is CBD, but we have other components like CBN, CBC, and THC, which we've talked about. The one that's most often talked about that you see in products exploding on the scene everywhere is CBD. It's one of the more than 100 cannabinoids found in cannabis plants, and it can be extracted from plants that are either marijuana or hemp, but under the provisions of the 2018 Farm Bill, to be legally used and to not be a Schedule I controlled substance, it has to be from the hemp plant as opposed to the marijuana plant. So we'll talk a little bit about it because you've probably seen it in products everywhere, the hemp and CBD, and we see it in sparkling waters, and we see it in juices, and we see it just about everywhere you can think of. You're seeing hemp and CBD products, and it's the number one question I get. I'm the chair of our food, beverage, and supplement practice here at Greenberg Traurig. And, I work with many companies in the hemp and CBD space, but I also work with, companies in every food, beverage kind of category you can think of. And whether it's kombucha or sparkling water or juice or, crackers or cookies, everyone wants to know, is it legal for me to use, hemp or CBD in my products? So we're going to talk briefly about whether that's the case or not. So the main federal agencies that are, likely going to look into your use of hemp and CBD are the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and the Federal Trade Commission. State agencies that also might look at it, state attorney generals, state departments of agriculture and Department of Health, and in many states, the Board of Pharmacy is the one that's actually looking at whether it's legal to use hemp and CBD in products. So the DEA, this was really the concern of many companies that were looking to get into the hemp and CBD space, because the DEA enforces the Federal Controlled Substances Act. And, under marijuana, the definition of marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act is all parts of the plant cannabis sativa, whether growing or not, the seeds thereof, the resin extracted from any such plant, and every compound. It did not include the mature stalks of cannabis sativa and fiber produced from those stalks, or the ungerminated seeds and any resin or mixture from those seeds. So those are really the two parts of the cannabis sativa plant that were not considered marijuana. So the problem up until December 2018 was that companies were using CBD in products. And for those of you who know, most CBD comes from the leaves and the flower of the plant. You're not going to get CBD from the ungerminated seeds or from the stalk. So the reality is that CBD was coming from parts of the plant that are defined as marijuana under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. And so, that's a problem. If you were selling products that have a controlled substance in it, there was a real possibility that the DEA could show up and someone was leaving in handcuffs. And, it's one thing to just be selling a product that might not have a permissible ingredient. Let's say you're doing a lemonade with activated charcoal, which hasn't necessarily been approved. That's all fine. But when the possibility is that someone could leave in handcuffs, and that's usually going to be the CEO or the COO, that makes the principals of a company think twice about whether that's a good idea or not. That risk all kind of changed with the 2018 Farm Bill. That's the name for the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. And the big thing that came out of that was it defined hemp as any parts of the cannabis sativa plant, including the seeds and all derivative extracts, cannabinoids like CBD and others, whether growing or not, from a plant that has a delta-9 THC concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. So basically it establishes is that it can come from any part of the plant as long as that plant has less than 0.3% THC. And that's really become the standard between selling a controlled substance and marijuana or selling a product with hemp. And that made a big difference because the DEA is not interested in products that have less than 0.3% THC. So again, it's the difference between, yes, the FDA might take action, but the DEA is not going to put you in jail. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, the USDA, that's not the USDA, states or tribes must submit plans to the USDA for approval. So different states apply to have authorization to manufacture and process hemp in those states. And so states have already started doing that. Also, a bunch of Native American tribes have done that so that they can grow and process hemp on their lands. The FTC has also looked at it, and I apologize, I know I'm going through quickly here, but I want to get to a couple different areas. Again, I think this presentation will be made available to people. And certainly Tim and my information will be here afterwards if you have follow-up questions or you want some further information on it. The FTC, as you probably know, regulates all advertising. All advertising has to be truthful and not misleading, fair, and substantiated. The big issue here with the FTC is that there's lots of companies out there making claims that it will cure cancer and Alzheimer's and diabetes. And the FTC just says there's you don't have that information. There's no proof that it will do that, and so you shouldn't be making those types of claims. And then the main agency tasked with enforcing, that's not the approved FDA logo there with the hemp and marijuana leaves in the background, but they're the ones tasked with, of course, enforcing whether companies can sell products. And so the main issue from the 2018 Farm Bill, as we talked about, was the DEA can't be involved, but it did not, and this is where I have to be really clear about this, it did not necessarily authorize the use of hemp or CBD in food and beverage products. It's not a Schedule I controlled substance, but it's still an ingredient that has to go through the same processes that anything else would be, whether it's apple juice or ashwagandha or vitamin D or hemp. You have to follow through with the main processes that are required to establish that those ingredients can be used. And essentially the FDA has taken the position that hemp, or that CBD, anything with CBD in it, is not, CBD is not a permissible ingredient. And the reason for that is because it was investigated as a drug by a company named GW Pharma back in 2007, and then again in 2013. And there's a provision of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and I'm going to skip that here, go to the food one, that says if an ingredient was first investigated as a drug and approved as a drug prior to having been used in a food, beverage, or supplement, you are not allowed to then turn around and use it in a food or beverage. And the FDA's position is no one was using CBD in foods or beverages prior to the investigation by GW Pharma in 2007. And so it's basically to protect the drug companies from doing, extensive investigations and then having everyone else jump onto it. So FDA takes the position, look, CBD was investigated by GW Pharma, therefore you can't use it in a food, beverage, or supplement. So one point to make clear is that the FDA's public position is CBD, and really anything with CBD in it, is not a legal ingredient for food, beverage, and supplement. Obviously, if you've been to the market or anywhere, you know that despite that position, we have a billion-dollar, industry of companies selling food, beverage, supplement, cosmetic products with hemp and CBD. So, there are some pushback areas with this FDA position. Most notably, that the ingredient investigated by GW Pharma was a 98% CBD isolate. And so the position from a lot of companies is, okay, so maybe that's true with a CBD isolate, but if I'm selling a full spectrum or broad spectrum hemp extract with 20% or 50% or maybe even the 80% CBD, that is not the same ingredient that was investigated by GW Pharma, and therefore it's not precluded. For those of you who aren't as familiar with hemp and CBD, this would be, akin to caffeine in coffee or yerba mate or something. If caffeine was investigated as a new drug and the FDA said, okay, no one was using that before specifically as an extract, isolated caffeine, you can't do it. That would also mean then no one could sell products with coffee or tea or yerba mate. And that's basically the position of the industry is you're talking about two different types of ingredients, an isolate of CBD or the fact that it happens to be naturally occurring in a hemp extract. And that's really the main position of companies that continue to sell. The FDA initially sent about 30 to 35 warning letters. We're up to probably about 70 warning letters, but in almost every case, the FDA has done it because of the fact that a company is making express disease claims, selling it to cure, again, Alzheimer's or cancer or diabetes or some of those types of things, and not just because of the fact that it was, an ingredient that the FDA has determined is not a permissible ingredient. They have yet to send a letter out solely on that basis. So, companies that are selling products in the market are really left with, basically the understanding that yes, the FDA has said they don't believe it's a legal ingredient, but practically, as long as you're not making egregious disease claims and you're making a safe product, it's unlikely that the FDA is going to take action against the company. Here's an example of some of the language in the warning letters. I'm not going to go through that right now. That's basically just what we were talking about, investigation by GW Pharma. Again, as we talked about, the main warning letters that FDA has sent out have been pretty clear and expressed disease claims that truthfully the FDA would have been sending out anyway, even if the company wasn't selling the product with hemp and CBD. If you're making those types of claims, you're going to get a warning letter. And that really is what I think has happened with the FDA and hemp or CBD. They're not exactly chomping at the bit to take action against companies in that area. But if you're going to be making express disease claims that they would be coming after it anyway, they're going to mention it in the letters, because if they don't say anything, it's almost like they're signing off on it. Again, they're going to focus on safety. If there's issues of safety, that's an issue. They're going to look at manufacturing operations. Are the current good manufacturing practices being followed? And there's always going to be a higher risk of products being imported into the U.S. The U.S. Customs and the FDA agents at the border typically are more strict and more aggressive than they are just if it's already on the shelves here in the United States. So you have a higher risk of product being rejected or action being taken when it's being looked at customs. What's the FDA done? I mean, a lot of people in the industry would say not a lot. There is a guidance. It's now called Cannabis and Cannabis-Derived Products. You can find it at this link here. And it talks about the positions we've been talking about, that the FDA believes it's not a permissible ingredient. There was a hearing in May of 2019. There was a 2-day hearing at FDA. From that hearing, an FDA task force was created. There was a lot of hope from industry that maybe they would come out with something in the fall of 2019. I thought that was a pipe dream based on the way things usually progress at FDA. Nothing happened then. In November, there was some recent additions regarding pregnancy and breastfeeding warnings with CBD. The reality is nothing has happened in 2020 with regard to hemp and CBD and the FDA. Certainly with COVID has kind of slowed everything down. The focus has shifted to companies making COVID claims and immunity claims, and just nothing has moved forward. Possibly with a new administration, we might see, an increase in activity as the Biden administration moves forward. Typically, you'll see more funds directed towards agencies like the FDA and the EPA. So we might see some more robust regulatory activity. And so we could see something coming out, maybe at the beginning of 2021, but I wouldn't expect anything before that. Quickly, I'll talk about, the different ways that people are selling products with hemp and CBD. I get this question all the time. Should I sell it as a supplement or should I sell it as a food or beverage? Because, there have been warning letters sent out from the FDA saying, well, it's not a legal ingredient in a supplement. So some companies say I should sell it as a food or beverage. Guess what? The FDA has also said it's not a legal ingredient in a food or beverage. So you're really talking about 6 of one, half a dozen of another. So I think the analysis outside of the CBD or hemp should go to what you would typically look at when you're looking at a product. What are the ingredients in the product? How is it being manufactured? What is the labeling going to look like to decide whether it really should be sold as a food, beverage, or supplement type of product? For dietary supplements, ingredients have to be vitamins, minerals, amino acids, herbs or botanicals, or extracts. You have to notify the FDA of any new dietary ingredients, and they have to be manufactured to the dietary supplement GMPs. We'll talk briefly here in the last couple of minutes about state regulation. There are some differences in state regulation, which might make more sense to be sold as a supplement as opposed to a food. But I would say typically the number one thing is, what is the delivery form? Because if it's an extract, like here in the picture to the right, if it's tablets or capsules, that is a dietary supplement. There is no provision in the regulations to sell a food in capsule form, to sell it in tincture form, you know, if you're selling in that form, it's a dietary supplement because there's no serving size or as what we call reference amount customarily consumed, the rack for those types of products. If you have a supplement facts panel, that's what that's what the nutrition labeling looks like. For conventional food, the difference is all ingredients have to be approved food additives or GRAS. Again, it's really the serving. If you've got a sparkling water or a beverage, I mean, it's a beverage, it's a food with nutrition facts. One of the big things for a supplement is you are not allowed to represent a supplement as a conventional food. So if you're calling your product a sparkling water, you can't call it both a sparkling water and then have a supplement facts panel on the back. You know, if you're going to call it a food, if you're going to treat it as a food, then it's a food or a beverage and not a supplement. This is probably one of the number one things that I talk with companies, even outside of the hemp and CBD space, but it's that evaluation of what is the way I should be properly selling this product. And that's a lot of what I do is I have companies who work with me on the packaging, the labeling. They come to me at the beginning. How should we really sell this product? What are the types of claims we can make? I mean, you know, majority of my time, that's what I'm doing with clients is working on how should this product be sold? What are the claims we can make? And, you know, is the packaging or labeling compliant? Again, we have the nutrition facts panel. That's the new labeling. Just a side note, all labeling has to be this way by January 1st of 2021. We've had like 4 years of kind of a grace period. I keep hearing people say, well, what's the grace period after that? We're living in the grace period. We've been in the grace period for 4 years. So there's no more grace period as of January 1st, 2021. Not going to cover topicals here right now, since we're at the America's Food and Beverage Show. Very briefly, state labeling requirements. This is probably the hardest thing right now, is that, you know, from a federal standpoint, you know, there's generally federal labeling requirements, putting aside whether the FDA says it's legal or not. The bigger issue now is that we have at least 15 states with different state labeling requirements. We've got things like in Indiana, Texas, Florida, Louisiana, and Utah, you're required to have a QR code or other scannable codes where you can look up the information about the certificate of analysis for the hemp ingredient used in the product. Utah and Louisiana require registration. Minnesota requires the name and address of the testing lab on the label. New Mexico requires THC content. So here's an interesting one. New Mexico requires that you declare the THC content on the label. Texas says you're not that you may not make a THC-free claim on the label. So what happens if you have 0 THC content? In New Mexico, you're required to say 0 THC. In Texas, you're not allowed to say it has 0 THC. So, you know, what's happened is it's made it very hard to have a label that's compliant with all states at once, because these different states have different labeling requirements. Finally, as always comes down to this, what are your litigation risks? Disease claims, the phrase all natural. Hopefully here at the Food and Beverage Show, no one says all natural anymore. I tell people, unless you plucked it off a tree or pulled it out of the ground and stuck it in a box or a bottle, you shouldn't be calling something all natural, with just the risk of those types of claims lately. Rich in and high in claims, you know, such as high in antioxidants, or I see a lot of terms on hemp labeling says phytocannabinoid rich. That's just not a permitted statement, because it suggests it's 20% or more of the daily value, and there is no daily value for phytocannabinoids. I think there's going to be a lot of litigation over THC-free claims. You know, you have to be very careful about making a claim that you will not test positive on a drug test. We've seen some litigation over that, people losing their jobs and then suing the company that said they wouldn't test positive. And tested to the levels declared on the label. It says 30 milligrams per serving, but when it's tested out, it comes out to 12 milligrams. You know, that's going to be a problem. That was my disclaimer. You always need to leave a disclaimer for way longer than I just left it on that panel. So when you're doing videos, make sure it's right. I'm going to turn it over to Tim now. That was the very Reader's Digest version of the state of regulation from a federal standpoint. And I'll turn it over to Tim for some other insights here.
Sure. Thanks, Justin, and always very interesting and enlightening to hear you speak. I'm going to follow up on a couple of things that Justin talked about real quick, specifically on state level labeling requirements and the idea of supplements. My practice here in Tallahassee differs from Justin in that we deal with a lot of policy development at the legislature, implementing new laws, at agencies implementing the rules from those laws, and helping clients go through the permitting and licensing processes that they need to go through before they get to Justin and the ability to produce an end product. In 2016, we were very involved in the legislation that passed here in Florida that created the first hemp pilot programs. Those were university programs that were sponsored in conjunction with the Florida Department of Agriculture, initially that looked at issues of cultivation and production. They've moved on, and we now have clients in the space doing supplement trials in Australia and so on through Florida State University. So the state level regulation is becoming very sophisticated. But what we found is, as we implemented the 2018 Farm Bill here in Florida in 2019 with legislation by Dr. Ralph Masulo, we did a few things very quickly, which you do in the legislative process. And we created a QR code system here in Florida, much like Justin discussed. But what we didn't take into account when that happened was there were already a variety of GRAS certified hemp products that are sold commonly today here in Florida at major supermarket chains. They had the problem where they had existing products like hemp seeds and hemp seed oil that they had success selling. But when the QR code law came into existence, those existing providers didn't have the QR code label, and nor did they want to make special labels for every state, as Justin alluded to with the kind of conflict between Texas and New Mexico labeling. So we went back into the law this past year in the 2020 legislative session and exempted anything that's GRAS certified from Florida's labeling requirements in an effort to not create excess burdens on folks that have already had the wherewithal and the ability to go through the FDA GRAS process. We've seen a lot of positive come from that. More and more folks are bringing their products into the state. There's a little more competition in the GRAS certified grain and oil market. And there's a little more interest. Also, Justin talked a little bit about the supplement world, and here in Florida, like a lot of states, we regulate animal supplements out of our state Department of Agriculture. But the problem being, we don't have a definition for animal supplement here in Florida. We have definitions for animal treats. We have definitions for animal food. However, there is very clearly a line of products out there by a variety of vendors that are CBD-based products. They are not foods. They are not treats. They do not have a guaranteed analysis. They do not intend or represent to provide any nutritional value to the animal, but they provide the CBD. And so the Department of Agriculture has been fantastic in working with us to try to find a place, a soft spot here in Florida for these animal supplement products without reinventing the wheel and without discouraging commerce or discouraging new entrants into the market. But the overall message I think we want to send from a state to federal level, or a federal to state level, however you want to look at it, is that every jurisdiction you walk into in the United States as it comes to hemp and CBD, you're going to have little differences in their regulatory format, whether that's the information they want the QR code on the label to take you to, whether they actually want a lab on the label, as Justin said. Just like the 2018 Farm Bill preserved the FDA and USDA's authority over hemp products, it also preserved the state's authority to regulate this area quite greatly. The only thing a state is preempted from is prohibiting the transportation. So they can't stop a shipment going from Georgia to Mississippi, but in Alabama, but they can prevent you from selling hemp gummy bears or whatever have you. So it's very important to look at the jurisdictions you want to both produce your products in, whatever that may be, and what jurisdictions you want to sell and distribute your products in, because there's going to be little differences as you go along. And like Justin said, some of these problems aren't necessarily just a regulatory fine. Sometimes you're talking to a guy with a badge. And, we appreciate y'all, and we appreciate you having us, and happy to take any questions.
All right, that was great, guys. Let's give it a few minutes for the questions to pop up. Again, I'm reminding our audience, you can leave your questions in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we'd be more than happy to answer them. If you have questions after this session, the contact information for Justin and Timothy are on the screen, so please take it down and address those or send those questions their way. Other than that, I thank you both very much for participating in the America's Food and Beverage Show this year. And like I said before, this session will be uploaded to the platform, the recorded version, within 24 to 36 hours. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, it looks like we're good, guys.
Thank you, Gandhi. Thank you, Justin.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.